They said I was trespassing on my own land. You believe that? Until I spun an old brass wheel and turned their $1 million cabin dream into the most expensive mud pit in Wisconsin. And I'm standing there at dawn where my grandfather used to stand, coffee steaming from his dented thermos in my hand, listening to diesel engines cough and die as excavators sink belly deep in what used to be Timber Lake, and that old, buried for decades smell rises out of the lake bed like a secret you can't keep down anymore. Yeah, that happened. Let me back up a sec and show you how we got here. Because if an HOA ever tried to steal your family's legacy, you want a plan too. You know what I mean? My name's Ezra Blackwood, third-generation civil engineer, 52 and stubborn as the granite in our shoreline. And my grandfather bought 47 acres of this water in 1924 with a handshake and a paper deed that looks like it was written with a fountain pen by a judge who believed ink could outlive greed. And for years my mornings were simple. Loons calling, pine sap sticking to your fingers, the dock boards singing that familiar creak under my boots while the fireplace he stacked stone by stone smoked just enough to smell like home. Until Constance Peton rolled in from Chicago in a white Escalade. Blonde highlights, Lululemon, smile that said rules are for other people, and within 6 months she'd sweet-talked herself into HOA president under the banner of Community Vision, which in plain English means my vision, your land. I come back from a 2-week job, gravel popping under my tires like corn, and orange survey stakes are stabbed into my shoreline like little plastic bayonets. Then Constance slides sideways across my driveway, boots that cost more than my truck payment. Waving a clipboard like a scepter, Ezra, perfect timing. Wonderful news about your property. And if you've ever heard somebody say wonderful news about your property, you already know to grab your wallet and run. Because her news was an emergency vote while I was conveniently out of town, 120 luxury cabins, community enhancement, and, this is the cute part, my land donated for the greater good. As if my grandfather's deed were some sentimental napkin from a long-closed diner. And when I say that deed's recorded at the courthouse, she air flicks it like a mosquito. Old surveys, inaccurate. Progress happens. Also, your little cabin doesn't fit our vision, which is when I heard my grandpa's gravelly voice from 100 summers ago. Son, some things you fight for even when the deck is stacked, especially then. The harassment came on cue. Quiet hours violation for sipping coffee at 6 a.m. A dock inspection that declared a century of family footprints non-compliant. Fines that stacked up like poker chips. Neighbors who used to wave suddenly studying their shoes. And a polo shirt enforcer barking cease that activity, while pointing at my mug like caffeine was contraband. So I did what engineers do when somebody tries to beat them with paper. I went to the basement of the county courthouse and started turning pages, the air thick with dust and old secrets. Yellow legal pad filling with notes, and there it was, the first hairline crack in their pretty little plan. Their incorporation paperwork was rushed, signatures missing, notices not properly served. And buried in my grandfather's 1924 deed was the old-fashioned poetry of riparian rights extending to the center line of the water body, which, translated from lawyer to English, means sometimes you don't just own dirt, you own the water, too. Then the envelope slid under the records room door like a spy movie, no return address. Just copies of environmental impact studies that should have been filed, but never were. And if you've ever read federal environmental law, you know it has real teeth. And the state suspended construction so fast, I still had the postage receipt in my pocket when the notice hit Constance's inbox, which is when she stormed down my drive with the kind of fury money buys when it can't buy the result. You have no idea who you're messing with. And I said, is that a threat? And she said, it's a promise. Here's where the ground shifted. While I'm combing HOA minutes, I noticed something cute. Braden Peton Construction, her husband's outfit, won the bid at a magically low price, which tends to happen when your spouse controls the vote. And at the same time, crews around the lake are working past sunset with floodlights white as an interrogation room, shoving rebar into footings like there's a deadline nobody's saying out loud. And private security starts prowling my shoreline at 3:47 a.m. claiming community safety. And the county suddenly gates the access road my family has used since Eisenhower. And at the diner, I'm the guy having a breakdown since the divorce. And anonymous notes appear on my windshield. Sell and leave. Because when greed can't buy you, it tries to scare you. So I go deeper, this time to the Historical Society, or Mrs. Henderson. The volunteer with eyes like she's cataloged every sin in 3 counties since Vietnam, pushes me a box and says, "Terrible what they're doing. Dear, sometimes the old solutions work best." And Lord if she wasn't right, because Timber Lake wasn't a lake at all before 1923, it was a log pond held up by a dam built by Northwoods Lumber. And the mechanism's still legal to operate for flood control. And when the state revenue clerk finally locates the record, she blinks behind horn-rimmed glasses and says, "Sir, this property can be purchased for back taxes, $847, and I have to sit down before I grin a hole through my face. Because the engineering specs say you can lower the lake 8 feet without violating a single rule, which would lay bare every foundation Constance has poured and maybe a few sins she hopes never see daylight." They tried lawfare. Winston Carlisle, attorney with a smile like a pickpocket. Federal environmental jurisdiction supersedes local theatrics when contamination appears, which is exactly where the second twist enters. Delilah Santos, reporter with a notebook and a sixth sense for rot, calls late one night. "Ezra, you need to hear this. Peton Finances are a house of cards, bankrupt projects in Illinois. Shell companies to shell companies." And she found proof half the homeowners never got the emergency meeting notices, which makes the vote illegal on its face. And then she drops a bomb. The EPA has historical records of dumping in this lake, not just lumber waste, but chemicals, drums, concrete debris. The kind of sediment history you can read like rings on a tree, and if confirmed, we're talking Superfund, automatic federal control, no construction, no vision, no exceptions. We build a coalition like a bridge. Jasper Toole, retired park ranger with the quiet fury of a man who's watched poachers and politicians take turns at the same carcass, has photos of concrete being washed into spawning beds and sediment plumes that killed 3 seasons of fingerlings. An environmental attorney named Camden Cross files suits under the Clean Water Act and state statutes like he's buttering toast. Buck Morrison upriver rallies owners who were never notified. And a university lab wires the lake with sensors that will record contamination as the water drops. Hard data the EPA loves. Then another controlled notch to make the buried truth rise where cameras and science can see it. Desperate people do desperate things. Trail cams catch Braden's crew at 2 a.m. The county tries an emergency psychiatric hold on me. Nice touch. Signed by a friendly judge who also happens to golf with Braden. And a forensic psychiatrist releases me with a report that reads like a professional eye roll. Delilah films Constance trying to bribe a clerk to bump our hearing. And by Sunday, the courthouse steps are a thicket of protest signs, reporters, and homeowners who've had enough. The rush of water sounding like a truth finally clearing its throat, and across the lake radios squawk, water dropping, shut down the trucks, and by 7 a.m. The lakebed is a black mirror of what's been done here for 70 years, rusted machinery, concrete bones, rainbow oil sheens that sting your nose, drums with faded has labels, and newer ones too. And at 8 on the dot the EPA arrives, 3 SUVs, a mobile lab, Dr. Sarah Bennett stepping out in a windbreaker with the easy calm of someone who's shut down a dozen sites like this. And she says the words that change the shape of the day. Federal investigation site. All work halted. Constance barrels in at 8:30, gravel spitting, eyes wide, voice pitched to shatter glass. "You can't do this. I have a restraining order." And Dr. Bennett, not looking up from her camera, says, "Ma'am, federal jurisdiction supersedes local orders." And when Constance pivots to the "we're the victims" routine, Buck plays the trail cam video for the whole crowd. Hush falls, just the beep of a sensor logging data as toxins hit air. And I walk over holding the original deed in one hand and the EPA's preliminary report in the other and say, "I didn't create this mess. I lowered the water so we could all see it. And your project would have stapled luxury porches onto a toxic dump, selling lake views with lead and solvents in the basement. You know what I mean." And the cameras pop, and the cuffs click. And somewhere a generator dies in a choking cough like it finally understands it's out of a job. 18 months is a blink in the life of a lake. Still, on a blue morning a year and a half later, I sit where I always sit, thermos warm, loons arrowing through water, so clear you can count pebbles 15 feet down. The dam a registered landmark with a trail where school kids come learn how water moves, and how truth does. 2. The HOA reformed with teeth that bite only what harms the lake. And my boy Derek brings his kids to fish off the same boards my father nailed. And I tell them what their great-great-grandfather told me. Some things you hold the line on, even when it costs. Especially then, because a legacy isn't a story you tell, it's a responsibility you carry. So now it's your turn. Was I right to drop that lake? To let the buried truth breathe, even if it made a mess first. Where do you draw the line between a community's vision and a family's rights? Between progress and the obligation not to poison your neighbors? Tell me your HOA horror stories and how you'd have handled Constance. What you think should happen to people who game the system and to the officials who help them. And if you want more David versus Goliath battles where the little guy actually uses the rules the right way, stick around and add your voice, because the next fight might be on your street. And sometimes all it takes to change the outcome is one person willing to turn the wheel.